Today we're going to look at how to use Google Drawings to create designs to cut on the carving. First thing we need to do is give our project a name. So up where it says Untitled Drawing, you're going to put your name, and we're going to call this Carvey Ornament. Once you've given it a name, we're ready to begin designing. We are going to be using the shape tools, the text tools, and possibly also the line tools for this. We're going to start with the shape tools. Right now, our background is in this checkerboard pattern, which means it's transparent. Unfortunately, if we leave it transparent, it's not going to work well when we import it into easel. We need to have a solid white background for our image import to work correctly. So I'm going to start by going to the shape menu. I'm going to go to my basic shapes, and I'm just going to get the rectangular shape here. I'm going to come up to the top corner of my workspace, and I'm just going to draw a box over everything. By default, it comes up light blue, and we want to change that. So I'm going to go to my paint bucket up here, and I'm going to turn it white. That also leaves us with a border in black, so I'm going to go to my border color, and I'm going to choose white for that as well. When I click off of this, I should now have a solid white background. Now I'm ready to begin designing my ornament. I'm going to go back to my shape menu, and I'm going to choose a shape to begin with. Basic shapes are usually the best. We want something with simple lines. Anything in this top row works. These will all be fine. You probably want to avoid fancier shapes like the little frame here, the solid shapes here, and the ones with the internal lines as well. So I'm going to start out with something simple. I'm going to go with a circle. And I'm going to make a nice big circle on my screen. In order to keep it from being oval, before I begin drawing, I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and as I draw, it will make sure that my circle stays a perfect circle and not stretching out into an oval. I'm going to make sure I'm happy with the size and kind of center it on my page. Now, the next step is to make this a solid black outline that's much thicker with a white center. So I'm going to come up to my paint bucket here, and I have two choices. I can either choose white or transparent. I'm going to go with transparent. My border color should be solid black. And then I'm going to go to my border weight, and we're going all the way down to 24 pixels. That should give us a nice thick border to work with. Our next step is to add a loop at the top. So I'm going back to my shapes. I'm going to get my circle tool again, and I'm going to draw out a smaller circle to be the loop at the top. Then I'm going to arrange it so it is at the top and as close to center as I can get. We're going to perfectly center it later, so for now just make sure it's basically in the middle. We also want to make sure that this loop is overlapping the first circle so that when we put it all together, it will become one big shape. The next part is the tricky part. We're going to add some text to this. There are several ways to do this. The most important thing to remember is that we don't want to have any of our text floating. Otherwise, when it carves out, it's just going to fall out. So we need to either use a cursive font where all of the letters are connected, or if we're using a regular font, we're going to use a line to help us support them. I'm going to start by going to my text box tool, and I'm going to draw a text box here on my ornament. I'm going to come up to my font size, and I'm going to start with size 72. We can adjust it later if we need to, depending on how large or small your word is. Then I'm going to go to my font menu, and I'm going to look for a font. If I am using a cursive font, I can just type and see if I'm happy with it. Right now, this is pretty tiny, and we can see it's floating in space. So this means I'm going to need to make this much larger. So I'm going to bump it up to 96. Still too tiny. So now I can click up here, and I'm going to go with, let's go with 150. Still too small for this one. So we'll try 200. And at that point, we get a little larger. We're about close to the size. You might need to adjust your text box a little to keep it all on one line. And now I'm going to move my text box around until I make sure that my letters are touching the sides. I want to make sure this letter that's by itself is overlapping the edge, and my connected letters should be touching over here. I can see that if I have my T touching, my H doesn't touch yet. So that means I'm going to select my text again, and I'm going to bump this up a little bit and try 220. Again, I need to stretch out my box a little, and then I can adjust a bit until I get it where I want it. This is just the tiniest bit too large. You can see if I move it over here, there's a bit of the T over there. And if I move it this way, my H is too large. So that means I'm going to readjust, and let's try 219. It's a little big. Let's try 217. And that looks perfect. So now I have my T supported on this side because it's now attached here, and my H supported on this side, and it's also connected to the other letters. Now my ornament is ready to be carved. I'm going to go in and I'm going to change the font on this and show you what to do if you're using a non-cursive font. This time I'm going to come in and I'm going to use this font. I find the thicker fonts work better than the skinny ones because there's more of them to carve. This one is obviously a little too big, so we're going to start adjusting our size again. And you can kind of eyeball it and see. Let's try 170. Still a little too big. And that one is looking a bit better. So now I know it's going to fit. The problem is these letters are all floating in space. If I get my T and my H to touch, those will be okay, but the E and C in the middle will not. There's an easy way around this. I'm going to come up to my line tool, and I want the solid line. I'm going to come down onto my shape, and I'm going to draw a line going across. Now my line's super skinny, so just like we did with our outline, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to make it 24 pixels. That gives me a nice thick line to work with. I'm going to go back to my arrow tool, and now I can grab that text box again and adjust my letters so that they are all touching at the bottom. This way, it doesn't matter if I'm using a non-cursive font, those letters will be supported. I can even get creative and add another text box underneath and have my second word touching the line at the top to make a double line. I'm going to click back over to one I made earlier, and you can see how it has the word on the top and the word on the bottom, and both of them are touching the lines. The last step that we want to take before we finish up is make sure everything is aligned perfectly in the center. That will make it look much nicer. I'm going to start by clicking on my circle at the top, and I'm going to hold down Shift after I click on it so that I can select more than one shape. I'm going to click on my big circle, and I'm going to click on my letters and my line. I now have all of these selected. I'm going to go up to Arrange on the menu bar, and I'm going to go down to Align. On the little menu that pops up, I'm going to go to Center, and we can see it's almost perfectly centered, but my word Tech is off. There's a reason for this. If I click on my text box, it is aligned to the left. I want to pull this down and choose center. So now my word will be perfectly centered. If I'm happy with it at this point, I am ready to export it so I can put it into easel. So I'm going to go to File, I'm going to go to Download, and we want to download it as a PNG image. Once it's been downloaded, we're ready to import it into easel using the image import tool.